Coming up on today's show, Jim Harbaugh, is he back in the mix for the Broncos head coaching job? We'll break down that report. Plus, DeMeco Ryans, did Denver lose out on him to Houston? It kind of seems that way. We'll touch on that as well. And then with that, some new candidates for the Broncos head coaching job that has just been a never-ending roller coaster. We got some dark horse names to watch out for. But first, right off the bat, we've got the honor and the privilege of having a live show here on the channel. Not a watch party, just a regular live show with you guys, hanging out for an hour to an hour and a half, talking about the latest Broncos news and rumors. A potential mock draft tomorrow, now that we know where San Francisco is picking, or where Denver's picking as a result, and a live mailbag. But it is tomorrow at 3 p.m. Mountain Time, 4 Central, 5 Eastern. So, like today's video, if you plan on tuning in for our first ever live show where you guys can interact with me on a more personal level, and we can get to know one another and talk shop, talk football, talk Broncos. So, like the video if you're going to be there tomorrow, 3 p.m. Mountain Time, 4 Central, 5 Eastern, right here on the channel. Now, let's jump into things here with this tweet from Ian Rapoport, who put out this morning that the Texans and 49ers DC DeMeco Ryans could meet as soon as this afternoon after he handles his San Francisco responsibilities. If all goes well, a hire could be finalized Tuesday or Wednesday. So we talked about this at the end of last week. It felt like it was a bit of a war, a bit of a bidding war, if you will. Not quite, but between Denver and Houston. And I thought Denver was a better situation. No bias, of course, but seems like Houston is the favorite to get DeMeco Ryans, and all of a sudden Denver is back to where they started, which is they are not that much closer to finding a head coach than they were on December 26th when they fired Nathaniel Hackett. So let me get this right off the bat here. First off, the Broncos' patience in this head coaching search is starting to backfire on them. They came out with 8 initial candidates. They did 8 first-round interviews with those candidates. They have not scheduled a second interview yet. And now it seems like all 8 of those candidates are out of the mix. I don't want to overreact, and I don't want to work myself up too much here. But is anyone else a bit worried? Is anyone else a bit concerned or panicked of, hey, the 8 candidates that they liked from the start appear to be out of the race now, and we're back to where we started here? So with that, we sort of segue into maybe the reason why you clicked onto today's show, and that is this from Ian Rapoport yesterday. Earlier this week, Broncos owner Greg Penner took a covert visit to Ann Arbor to sit with Michigan coach Jim Harbaugh, a mission that ended without Denver hiring a coach. Another big swing. What happened and what's next for me and Tom Pelissero. And then he had a little quote, a little article, and we're going to take a look at it briefly. But Jim Harbaugh all of a sudden looks to be back in the mix. Why is that? It's a little interesting, right? Why did he ever leave the race if the Broncos liked him all along enough to go have a second visit with him in Ann Arbor, this time face-to-face? Here's what Ian Rapoport and Tom Pelissero wrote. A source close to Penner said no offer was made during this week's visit and that he wanted to visit Harbaugh in part because it was the only candidate he hadn't interviewed in person. But Harbaugh has remained willing to listen and has told people if he were to return to the NFL, the Broncos' job is the one he'd want. Though Harbaugh has not yet gone back on his stated plans to stay at his alma mater, the door remains open. It says in part because they hadn't done an in-person interview yet. No, I think the bigger part is this is a sign of the ownership, the CEO Greg Penner, and the search committee starting to panic a little bit, starting to go back to some of the candidates that maybe they moved on from because now they've got nothing left here. I think Harbaugh would be a great hire. I'm not against hiring Harbaugh. I'm just a little, curious and honestly concerned of, wait, if you want Harbaugh now, then why didn't you hire him from the start? Oh, you want to do a full, head coaching search. I like that. But they haven't done that. They've just done 8 first-round interviews. We are past the AFC and NFC Championship games now, and there are no second interviews scheduled. They're the only team this far behind. 5 openings this year. The Panthers have made their hire, Frank Reich. The other 4, one of them was the Cardinals, who didn't even have a GM at the start of this, and they appear to be closer to their end result than the Broncos. Now, I understand that there is no game to be played next Sunday, so some of you might go, what's the rush? What's the big deal? They got plenty of time. Here's my big deal. If they're going to go with a young coordinator as their next head coach, that young coordinator is going to need a very good staff around him. CC Nathaniel Hackett. And if they're going to be the last head coach hired, well, a lot of the good coordinator options might be snatched up and gone by then. So with that, we continue to move on the show. So I'm feeling a bit under the weather, so I'm not like a little bit of brain fog right now. But Zach Stevens tweeted out this here. According to Ian Rapoport and Tom Pelissero this past week, the Broncos informed Raheem Morris, David Shaw, Jim Caldwell, and Ejiro Evero that the team was going another direction in their coaching search. This is where you can kind of tell from my tone of concern and signs of panic, because I look at the Broncos interview list now, and there's a lot of red X's and question marks. The door's not completely shut on Sean Payton. Doesn't feel like it's very likely, though. Jim Harbaugh? Don't know. Thought he was out of the mix. Might be back in the mix now. Dan Quinn says he's staying in Dallas. Evero, according to Pelissero and Rapoport, is out of the mix, along with Caldwell, Morris, and Shaw. And then we have DeMeco Ryans, who, by the time you're watching this, may be the Houston Texans head coach. So with that all being said, what's your confidence level in this coaching search? Scale it 1 to 10 for me. I've asked this before, but I'm re-asking it now because my answer has changed. I think I was at like a 5. I think I was like a 3.9 or something the first time I asked this. I'm up to a solid 7.6, right? I mean, the search committee put together a list of 8 candidates. All those top candidates that they thought were their top 8 guys at the start of this process appear to be off the table for one reason or another. And so now it appears that the Broncos are back to square one. They're back to where they were on December 26th, where they've got to find a fresh batch of candidates. Because if they don't get Harbaugh because he wants to stay at Michigan, and Sean Payton goes back to remains with Fox, and they ruled out all those other candidates because they just didn't see a mesh or a fit with them in their interviews, well, now I wonder, if you didn't like those guys, I wonder how much you're going to like the other candidates that you initially passed on. Could be a blessing in disguise. Maybe it was a happy accident and it works out well, and we all look back and laugh and go, oh, thank goodness that some of those guys passed on the Broncos job, or they didn't like David Shaw, because then they wouldn't have resulted with a Super Bowl winning coach coming over from one of these guys. But with that being said, we have some new candidates, some dark horses to watch for. And that is 2 DCs and 2 OCs. And let's start with the Cincinnati Bengals offensive coordinator, Brian Callahan. Now, quickly, Callahan is not the only name getting attention from the Broncos potentially. Tom Pelissero this morning tweeted out that the Cardinals also requested an interview with Bengals OC Brian Callahan. So if the Broncos have any real interest in Brian Callahan, they might want to get a bit of a move on, because the last thing I want to see is another coach that they were just too slow to move their feet on, and he gets taken away or he decides to remain at his current post. Now, if you're not familiar with the Bengals offensive coordinator, Brian Callahan, some quick notes and like a Wikipedia blurb on him. He's been the Bengals OC since 2019, right? He came over or joined Zach Taylor's staff there. Now, he might be a familiar name, on the Broncos coaching staff from 2010 to 2015. So he knows a little bit about the area. He knows the team. He knows the organization. He was a part of that Super Bowl winning staff right there. And he was also on the Broncos head coach candidate list last year. So for George Payton, it wouldn't be the first time he picked up the phone and reached out to Brian Callahan potentially. So there is some familiarity and there is some, common ground there. But they didn't hire him last year. Maybe it was, for one reason or another. And they did not include him on their initial candidates list this year. And you would think if Brian Callahan blew them away last year, but ultimately decided on Hackett, maybe they go back to last year and go, all right, let's look at the names last year who we really liked and we regrettably passed on. And we'll start with those guys, which they did for some people, but Brian Callahan was not one of them. Moving on here, another Cincinnati Bengal coaching staff member. That is their DC, Lou Anarumo. So, Lou has a lot of NFL experience. He's been the Bengals defensive coordinator since 2019. He's got 11 years of NFL coaching experience, which compared to the rest of the names we'll look at is a lot more. Now, he has really improved this Bengals defense from when he started to this season. In 2019, the Bengals in his first year gave up 26.3 points a game. In 2022, he brought that number down a whole touchdown. That's a lot. And the Bengals weren't investing crazily on the defense, right? I mean, they got some nice free agents and whatnot, Hendrickson and things like that. But their top picks were all pretty much offensive players. Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase. So it's not like he was handed a first overall pick that was a defensive end. He really revamped this defense. And yes, he made some changes. But, for the most part, he improved on what he had there in Cincinnati. Now, we got two more names to look at, but first, today's sponsor, BetUS. If you have not already gotten started with them, make sure you do so by going to chatsports.com/bet and using promo code Broncos125. Hate the Chiefs? Me too. You can bet on the Eagles in the Super Bowl by going to chatsports.com/bet and using promo code Broncos125. Philly is currently 2-point favorites. Little bit of a surprise, in my opinion. I think that's a big sign from Vegas of we've got a lot of concerns about the injuries that the Chiefs sustained in that win over Cincinnati. So whether you want to ride with Philly, whether you want to take the over or the under, make your picks at chatsports.com/bet. Use promo code Broncos125 and join me on Eagles -2. So the next candidate to watch for here is the Eagles offensive coordinator, Shane Steichen. This has been a name that was getting some buzz during this coaching staff. I know a lot of people thought he might go to Carolina and be the next Panthers head coach. They ultimately went with Frank Reich. So let's get to know Shane Steichen a little bit here. He has been the Eagles OC for all of 2 seasons so far. Now, last year, after just 1 season, kind of like Evero, got a little bit of head coaching buzz. I know the Broncos kind of checked in on him a little bit last year. So he also knows what it's like to coach in the AFC West. He was with the Chargers for a long time, compiling 9 seasons of work there. And he's gotten to work really quickly in Philly. Okay, this year the Eagles offense was the 3rd highest scoring offense in football, putting up over 28 points per game. Now, there are some pros, and well, I should say pros, but there are some other elements to this as well, right? Offensive coordinator behind an offensive-minded head coach. Sometimes you always kind of wonder, who is it, right? Is it the OC? Is it the head coach? But I do like Shane Steichen. I'm just kind of wondering, if he's a candidate now, why wasn't he a candidate initially? Right? What concerns did you have back then? And now you just go, well, we're shit out of luck because all of our other 8 top guys are off the table at this point. Moving on here to our final dark horse candidate to watch for. That is Jonathan Gannon. This is a name to really keep an eye on, in my opinion. I think if one of these 4 guys emerges as a real candidate for the job, this may be the guy. It's the Eagles defensive coordinator, Gannon. He's been at that job since 2021. Now, like I said, a highly rumored name to watch out for. I know a lot of reporters closer to the situation have said, keep an eye on Gannon. He could be gaining some traction. Now, he was on the Broncos head coach candidate list in 2022, like Callahan. So, again, I wonder, was that just Greg Penner, who was not a part of that search last year, starting completely from scratch, completely from the bottom and going, we don't care what happened in last year's search. We're not going to have any news or notes from that. We're starting from ground zero. Sorry for all that last year, George Payton, but we're not going to use any of that information this year. Maybe, maybe not. I'm not quite sure, to be honest with you. Now, I will say Gannon, who is currently busy coaching for a Super Bowl, does give a bit of a red flag, well, a bit of a caution, if you will. That's the word I'm looking for here, of he's going to be busy with the Super Bowl for the next 2 weeks. So you might have to wait 2 weeks if that's who you really want here. Then there's also this. After the Eagles beat the 5th-string quarterback from the San Francisco 49ers, Christian McCaffrey, Jonathan Gannon, after the game, said, Philly is keeping me. Good, bad, or indifferent, I'm staying here. Some people saw this and said, all right, it's a close case, moving on. No way Gannon's the next head coach for any team. Maybe. Maybe winning a Super Bowl and getting a head coaching job would be tough to pass on, right? If he wins a Super Bowl, so he feels like they finished what they started in Philadelphia, and the next progression, next step is you get to be a head coach, maybe he looks back and he goes, yeah, I kind of got caught up in the emotions of winning a Super Bowl at home in front of our fans, and I was like, I don't want to go anywhere. I watched Wolf of Wall Street last night. I'm not fucking leaving. But then you win a Super Bowl, and then the Broncos offer to double or triple your salary as a DC and become a head coach, and you go, whoa, actually, that does sound pretty tempting. Where do I sign? So predict it for me, because your guess is as good as anyone's at this point. If Greg Penner's watching, he might not even have the answer. But who will end up as the next Broncos head coach? Who's going to be the 20th head coach in franchise history? Educate me. Let me know in the comment section below.